Hello everyone and welcome. We're going to continue on with staples and flavorings in the kitchen. Today we're talking about nuts. So let's get started. A nut is defined as a single seed kernel from a fruit surrounded by a hard shell. The oldest evidence of nut consumption was found in Iraq, and it dates back to over 50,000 BCE. The oldest consumed nuts include wild almond, prickly water lily, chestnuts, and pistachios, and acorns. The Greeks and Romans highly favored the walnut, and Romans considered nuts the food of the gods. Nuts are a good source of protein and vitamin B, and also contain a number of other elements that are highly beneficial to human health. They contain healthy unsaturated fats, omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, plant sterols, which are natural compounds found in plants that can help safely lower your cholesterol levels, and arginine, which is an amino acid that helps body build protein. Ancient Greeks believed that hazelnuts could cure coughing and baldness. According to research, frequently eating nuts lowers level of inflammation related to heart disease and diabetes, and may improve artery health, decrease the risk of blood clots, which can lead to heart attacks and strokes, lower the risk of high blood pressure, lower the risk of early death due to heart disease, lower unhealthy cholesterol levels, specifically low density lipoprotein or LDL, also known as bad cholesterol, and triglycerides, which can clog arteries. Macadamia nuts, both raw and toasted, are the most calorie-packed nuts on the market, containing 204 calories per 1 ounce or 28.4 grams. Chestnuts, which are roasted, have the least at 70 calories per 1 ounce or 28.4 grams. Tree nut allergies are some of the most common allergies in the world, affecting 0.5 to 1% of people in the United States. Examples of tree nuts include cashews, pistachios, almonds, Brazil nuts, hazelnuts, pecans, walnuts, pine nuts, and lychee nuts. The most common allergies are to cashews, walnuts, pistachios, and hazelnuts. In the US, the most common nut allergy is cashews, followed by walnuts. And in the UK, the most common nut allergy is to hazelnuts. As I'll mention later, peanuts are not actually nuts. Nuts are highly traded on the world market. In 2021, the United States was the leading exporter in edible nuts, with total exports equaling $8.15 billion US. In 2018, global consumption of peanuts was approximately 42.6 metric tons. Almonds were the second most highly consumed nuts at a much lower amount of 1.19 million metric tons. Nuts can be used for a number of things in the kitchen, everything from thickening soups and stews, replacing eggs, adding to cereal or in a salad, or as an addition to salad dressing, as a breading or topping to replace breadcrumbs or panko, used as a crust or in a butter, in a cream sauce, as a flour, in baking, as a garnish or an ingredient such as in pad thai. A lot of uses for nuts in the kitchen. Also, they're great for snacking. It should be noted that nut oils are much more volatile and should be treated much more carefully, as if they get rancid, they will become bitter, and they respond to heat much differently depending on the oil. There is a video in this series on nuts and oils, and that link can be found in the description. All right, so moving on, I'm going to discuss some of the most popular nuts on the market, and for some of them I'll discuss different uses for them and additional information. And we're going to start off with almonds. Almonds are available whole and sliced and slivered and ground. The process of blanching almonds removes their outer skin. Natural almonds are usually found with their skin on. Almonds are also the main ingredient in a product called marzipan, which is used in baking. And marzipan is just a mixture of like sugar and ground almonds and honey that can be used as a coating and for decoration in baking projects. Almond pulp, which is the leftovers from grinding almonds and making almond milk, can be reused as a facial scrub by simply adding some sugar, specifically coconut would be best, and honey. Almonds are among the first cultivated nuts by human beings. Almonds depend on pollination of bees in order to produce almonds. Almonds have a very long storage life, and as long as they're kept in a tight sealed container, can be stored for up to 2 years. The longer shelf life is due to the fact that they're rich in vitamin E. Brazil nuts, which are also known as cream nuts, are available both in shell and out of shell. They can be eaten raw or roasted and salted and in baked goods. They're native to South America and actually are a very large seed rather than a traditional nut. They require a specific kind of bee for their pollination, and they can take up to 10 to 30 years to mature. Cashews, like almonds, are among the most popular and best nuts to use for cooking. Cashews are the seed of a plant that is related to poison ivy and poison sumac. So if you have a poison ivy allergy, you might want to be careful when consuming cashews. Cashews are actually toxic while they're in the shell, and so you will never see in-shell cashews in the market. Cashews are used in savory dishes as well as some confections. They are native to Brazil and are widely cultivated in India and Africa. They were introduced to Europeans in the late 17th century by Dutch traders. Cashews are actually classified as a fruit. Chestnuts are considered a true tree nut. They must be cooked before consumption. They're available steamed, dried, boiled, and toasted, and sometimes as a canned puree. Their high starch content makes them ideal for thickening sauces and soups. Coconuts are the seed of the coconut palm tree. They're not a true nut, but under loose translation, they can be considered a nut and are considered a nut. The interior of a coconut contains a viscous liquid called coconut water. While the interior liquid is called coconut water, it should not be confused with coconut milk or coconut puree, which are products produced by the processing of the coconut flesh. The flesh is available shredded and flaked and in unsweetened and sweetened forms. Coconuts that are fresh, that are showing signs of mold or are cracked or moist, should be discarded. Next, we're moving on to hazelnuts, and hazelnuts are also known as filberts. They are also called a cob and a Spanish nut, and hazelnuts are considered a true nut. The cultivated form is known as a filbert, meaning then that the wild form is known as a hazelnut. Filberts are a little larger and more mild in flavor than hazelnuts. Writings from 2800 BCE positions the hazelnut among the 5 sacred nourishments provided by God to humans, according to Chinese manuscripts. The hazelnut came to America in 1885 and was brought here by a horticulturist named Felix Gillette. And hazelnuts in the United States are now grown primarily in Oregon and Washington state. Removing the skin of the hazelnut takes about 12 to 15 minutes in the oven at 275 degrees or 135 degrees Celsius, followed by a gentle rubbing using a dry cloth or mesh sifter. Next, we have the macadamia nut, and the shell of a macadamia nut is very hard. It takes a lot of work to crack it, and that a lot of work is about 300 psi. So one of the only ways to remove them from their shell is through a mechanical process. And that is also why they're always available already out of the shell. Macadamia nuts originated from the forests of Queensland, Australia. And it is important to note that macadamia nuts are poisonous to dogs. Next, we're moving on to that peanut. Peanuts that are not actually a nut. Peanuts account for 2/3 of nut consumption. I don't know why they keep calling them a nut. I know we all think of them as nuts, but like why they're including them in nut consumption, I have no idea. Peanuts are actually legumes, which is basically a bean. Legumes are beans. And so they grow underground, mostly in southern states when it comes to the United States. Peanuts are eaten raw and roasted, shelled and unshelled. These days, flavored with a number of things if you get them in a gas station. And in the United States, they're also eaten boiled, which I've never tried, but that does not sound awesome. Peanuts originated in South America. They were introduced to Africa and Europe by the Spanish and Portuguese slave traders and then brought to America by slaves. Initially, peanuts were considered food for the poor, while the Incas developed a paste made out of ground peanuts as far back as 950 BCE. Among modern inventors credited for the development of peanut butter are a doctor in St. Louis in 1890 who is said to have created a paste of peanut butter for patients with poor chewing ability, George Washington Carver, who developed approximately 300 products made from peanuts, including flour, paste, insulation, paper, wallboard, wood stains, soap, shaving cream, and skin lotion, as well as John Kellogg, the inventor of Kellogg's cereal. So all three of those men are credited with peanut butter in North America. Peanut butter debuted at the World's Fair in 1904. Then we have pecans, which are available whole and shelled, and in various grades and size pieces. They are a very popular nut in the United States, and they are native to the Mississippi Valley, with archaeological remains being found dating back to 6100 BCE, so over 8,000 years ago. Then we have pine nuts, which are rarely chopped because they are very small. Pine nuts require roasting if using them in a raw food, such as like a salad. And pine nuts are essential to making a traditional pesto. Moving on to pistachios. California now produces the most pistachios in the United States. When pistachios are ripe, they naturally open their shells. So when you find one in a bag that is closed, that just means that it hasn't gotten to the point that it's ripe enough to open its own shell. Pistachios are actually a seed from a grape-like fruit. So again, another seed masquerading as a nut. Walnuts, another of the most popular cooking nuts, are related to the pecan. Walnuts arrived in North America from Spain in the 1800s, being brought here by the Franciscans. Walnuts are the oldest known consumed nuts, and their consumption is dated back to well before 10,000 BCE. The English walnut, now primarily grown in California, is milder and easier to shell. Walnuts outside of the United States are more popular than pecans. Moving on to tiger nuts, which is a new nut on the market considered a superfood. And it's, again, not a nut. It's actually a root whose existence dates back to Egyptian times, as well as being found with the buried remains of ancient Egyptians. Finally, we move on to hemp seeds, or hemp hearts, which are actually a nut, not a seed. Hemp seeds are nuts that is high in 2 essential fatty acids, as well as being really high in protein, containing about 30% protein. In addition to that, they contain all the essential amino acids that the human body requires and can't make. It's been determined that the protein in hemp seeds is of much higher quality than any proteins found in other plants. I highly recommend playing around with hemp seeds if possible. They're really good sprinkled on a salad or in some yogurt. Those are the best way to start if you are interested in including hemp seeds in your diet, which I do recommend, since they're very, very good for your body. Hemp seeds are one of the only ways to get a complete protein profile from a single ingredient outside of actual meat. Quick, we'll just move on to the various ways that you can toast nuts, and there are 3. Nuts are often toasted to enhance their flavor, but also to lengthen shelf life. and improve their texture. Toasted nuts should not be bitter, and they should not be burned. And if you're roasting nuts for grinding, make sure that you let them come to room temperature before grinding in order to retain the oils in the nuts. One way of toasting nuts is in the oven. Lay them on a flat, even baking sheet. Set the oven to 275 degrees Fahrenheit or 135 degrees Celsius and place the tray on the center rack. Toast until desired results, checking often. The second way is in the microwave. I've never actually attempted this, but the instructions are as follows. Place in an even layer on a microwave safe plate and microwave in 1 minute intervals. Taste test after each minute to see if they have reached the desired results. The third way is on the range in a pan, which is I think the most traditional way that people toast nuts. And this can be done by placing a large frying pan over heat and putting the nuts in them and moving them around until they start to give off a bit of a nutty smell. Do not add fat or oil to the pan if you're toasting nuts, and make sure to not leave them. I recommend, if you have the space for it, to toast nuts on the stovetop because they are the easiest to monitor. Different nuts require different toasting times. For example, almonds need about 10 minutes. Peanuts require a time closer to about 20 minutes in the oven. It's important to experiment with different toasting methods and times to identify how long you want your nuts toasted. Finally, we come to the end, everybody's favorites, storing nuts. Very similar, again, to a lot of things. So you can store nuts in the pantry, in the freezer, and in the fridge. So there's a lot of options here. If you're storing them at room temperature, make sure they're in an airtight container in a cool location, away from odors and moisture. When stored this way, they can be stored well for up to 3 months. And I would recommend using glass over plastic. In the refrigerator, nuts can be stored for up to 6 months. Again, in a sealed tight container. And then if freezing, nuts can be stored for up to a year. Again, in a sealed tight container. So we've got in the cupboard 3 months, in the fridge 6 months, in the freezer 9 months. Pretty easy to remember if you ask me. The same storing instructions can be applied to nut flours or ground nuts. Proper storage can prevent nuts and ground nuts from becoming rancid too quickly. And again, light, heat, humidity, and excess moisture causes nuts to spoil faster. Now, I think that that's all. This week's video was going to be nuts and seeds, but when I did the read through, it was a little bit longer than I wanted for both topics. So next week, come back and check out the video on seeds. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section below. Please consider giving me a thumbs up or subscribing, sharing the channel. Thank you for watching my video today. And as always, have a wonderful day. Followed by a gentle rubbing using a dry cloth